The chandeliers of the High Museum of Art dripped light, like liquid diamonds, casting a golden glow over the most powerful figures in Atlanta. The air, thick with the scent of white orchids and the effervescent tang of vintage champagne, hummed with the low murmur of billion-dollar deals and political maneuverings disguised as pleasantries. This was the annual Atlanta Philanthropy Gala, a carefully orchestrated performance of civic virtue where the city's elite gathered to celebrate their own generosity. And tonight, the star of the show was Jasmine Washington. From her seat at the head table, Jasmine maintained the serene, almost regal composure that had become her public signature. In a bespoke gown of ivory silk that fell around her like sculpted marble, she was an island of minimalist elegance in a sea of ostentatious jewels and designer labels. She listened with polite attention as the mayor of Atlanta, a man whose career she had both saved and now subtly controlled, delivered a soaring tribute to her contributions. A daughter of Vine City who never forgot her roots, the mayor intoned, his voice echoing through the ballroom. A visionary who built a global technology empire from the ground up, and then, with unprecedented generosity, turned her brilliance toward the service of our city. Founder of Securette, benefactor of the Washington Foundation, and the driving force behind our community's technological renaissance. It is my profound honor to present the Atlanta Humanitarian of the Year Award to Ms. Jasmine Washington. The applause was a tidal wave of sound. Jasmine rose, her movements fluid and deliberate. She walked to the podium, the silk of her gown whispering against the floor. She accepted the heavy, crystal award, her smile practiced and perfect, her eyes sweeping over the sea of faces, some adoring, some envious, some calculating. "Thank you, Mayor," she began, her voice calm and clear, carrying without effort to the farthest corners of the room. "To receive this honor in the city that raised me is a privilege beyond measure. But this award isn't truly for me. It is for every child in a forgotten neighborhood who has a gift the world hasn't yet seen. It is for every parent working 2 jobs to build a future they may never fully enjoy. It is proof that talent is universal, but opportunity is not. Our work is to bridge that gap." Her speech was short, powerful, and impeccably delivered. As the applause washed over her again, she returned to her table, the crystal award feeling cold and strangely inert in her hands. Maria Rodriguez, her fiercely loyal executive assistant, leaned in. "Perfect, as always. Jay," she whispered, "you could sell water to a drowning man." Jasmine offered a small, genuine smile. "Let's hope I don't have to." Across the table, David Chen, her corporate counsel and oldest friend, raised his champagne flute in a silent toast. His sharp, intelligent eyes darted around the room, constantly assessing threats and opportunities. He was her strategic right hand, the one person who understood the intricate chessboard of her life. It was then that she felt a presence beside her, a shadow falling over the pristine white tablecloth. She didn't need to look up to know who it was. The scent of his cologne, an expensive, aggressive blend of oud and sandalwood, preceded him. Alistair Croft. He was the silver-haired scion of an old-money Atlanta family, the CEO of Croft Enterprises, a sprawling conglomerate with deep roots in the city's foundations. He was charismatic, ruthless, and the only real rival she had in this city. He moved through these circles not as a participant, but as a proprietor. "Jasmine," he said, his voice a silken purr that barely concealed its condescending edge. "What a moving speech. It's always so inspiring to see someone from your background achieve so much. The board's diversity initiatives are clearly a resounding success." The insult was a perfectly crafted microaggression, a poisoned dart wrapped in the velvet of a compliment. David stiffened beside her, but Jasmine's expression remained unchanged. She slowly turned her head to meet Alistair's gaze. His eyes were the pale, predatory blue of a winter sky. "Thank you, Alistair," she replied, her tone even. "I'm glad to know my success inspires you. Perhaps one day Croft Enterprises will find its own visionary leader, instead of relying on the one it inherited." A flicker of fury, quick as a snake's tongue, crossed Alistair's face before being replaced by his signature smirk. The game was afoot. He gestured with the glass of red wine in his hand, a deep, blood-red Bordeaux. "To improbable rises," he said, his voice laced with insinuation. And then, with a movement that was too fluid to be accidental, he tilted his wrist. The red wine cascaded from his glass, a crimson stain spreading rapidly across the immaculate ivory silk of her gown, right over her heart. A collective gasp rippled through the nearby tables. The murmur of the ballroom faltered. Maria shot to her feet, her face a mask of outrage. David's hand clenched into a fist on the table. Jasmine didn't move. She simply looked down at the ruin of her dress, then back up at Alistair. Her calm was absolute, an unnerving stillness in the eye of a gathering storm. "That was clumsy of you, Alistair," she said, her voice dangerously quiet. "My apologies," he replied, the words dripping with insincere charm. "My hand must have slipped." He made a show of dabbing at the stain with his cocktail napkin, his touch lingering just a moment too long on her chest. Jasmine rose slowly from her chair, her 5'10" frame giving her a commanding presence. The ballroom was now almost entirely silent. Every eye was on them. The flash of a photographer's camera went off from across the room. "You should be more careful," she said, her voice as cold and sharp as broken glass. "Some stains don't wash out." Alistair's smirk vanished, her refusal to be rattled, her quiet dominance in the face of his public provocation, had stripped him of his power. He saw not a victim, but an equal, and he could not abide it. In that moment, his carefully constructed facade of civilized superiority crumbled, revealing the raw entitlement beneath. He did it without thinking, a reflexive act of aggression to reassert his dominance. His hand came up, fast and hard. The sound of the slap was shockingly loud in the silent room, a sharp, ugly crack that echoed off the high ceilings and marble floors. Jasmine's head snapped to the side from the force of the blow, her hair coming loose from its elegant arrangement. The world seemed to freeze. For a split second, there was only the ringing in her ears and the hot, stinging pain on her cheek. And then, the memory came. She is 15, standing in the sterile, beige lobby of a downtown bank. The air smells of recycled air and old paper. She is wearing her best school dress, trying to be invisible as her father stands before the bank manager's imposing mahogany desk. Her father, a proud man who drove a city bus with meticulous care, who polished his shoes every night and believed in the fundamental fairness of the world, is pleading. He is explaining the unexpected medical bills for her mother, the overtime shifts that were cut. His voice is thick with a humility that costs him everything. The bank manager, a portly man with a shiny suit and a gold watch that glints under the fluorescent lights, leans back in his leather chair. He isn't listening. He is enjoying this. He looks at her father with an expression of bored contempt. "Rules are rules, Mr. Washington," the manager says, his voice slick with condescension. "We can't make exceptions for everyone who has a sob story. Perhaps if you had managed your finances more responsibly." Her father's shoulders slump. The humiliation is a physical weight, pressing him down. He is powerless. He is broken, and she is watching. A silent witness to the slow, casual murder of her father's dignity. In that moment, watching the manager dismiss her father like an insect. A cold, hard promise forms in the heart of the 15-year-old girl. She will never be powerless. She will never be a victim. She will acquire so much power that no one will ever be able to humiliate her or anyone she loves again. She will build walls of steel and diamond around her heart, and her composure will be her ultimate weapon. The memory receded, leaving behind an icy clarity. Jasmine slowly turned her head back to face Alistair. The red mark of his hand was a stark brand on her cheek. Her eyes were not filled with tears, or fear, or even anger. They were filled with something far more terrifying purpose. The ballroom had erupted into a chaos of shouted words and frantic movement. Security guards were surging forward. The mayor was on his feet, his face a picture of horror. David was already shielding her, his body a protective barrier between her and Alistair. But Jasmine saw only Alistair Croft. His chest was heaving, his face flushed with a mixture of rage and a dawning, panicked realization of what he had just done. She raised a hand, a simple, calming gesture that silenced her own people. Her gaze locked with his. She said nothing. She didn't have to. The declaration of war was in her eyes. It was a promise of a cold, meticulous, and total annihilation. He had just slapped a billionaire tech CEO, a philanthropist, the city's secret chief of police. But he had made a far more dangerous mistake. He had slapped the 15-year-old girl who had sworn an oath in a sterile bank lobby. And for that, there would be no forgiveness, only a reckoning. The penthouse apartment was a sanctuary of calculated minimalism, a stark contrast to the gilded opulence of the gala. Spanning the top floor of Atlanta's tallest residential tower, its floor-to-ceiling windows offered a god's-eye view of the city's glittering expanse. The decor was a symphony of cool grays, sharp blacks, and stark whites. There were no photographs, no sentimental trinkets, only museum-quality modern art and custom-designed furniture that valued form and function over comfort. It was a space designed not for living, but for thinking. Jasmine stood before one of the vast windows, a glass of ice water in her hand. The ivory gown lay discarded on a chrome chair. The red wine stain, a livid wound against the pale silk. She had showered, scrubbing her skin until it was raw, but she could still feel the phantom sting of Alistair's hand on her cheek. David Chen and Maria Rodriguez sat on a low-slung leather sofa, the silence in the room thick with unspoken fury. Maria, usually a whirlwind of energy and efficiency, was uncharacteristically still, her hands clenched in her lap. David watched Jasmine, his expression a mixture of concern and strategic analysis. "The press is a feeding frenzy," Maria said finally, breaking the silence. Her tablet glowed in the dim light, displaying a torrent of news alerts. "Gala slap is trending worldwide. Every major network has reached out for a comment. The mayor's office has issued 3 statements in the last hour, condemning Alistair in the strongest possible terms." "Croft's PR team has gone dark," David added, scrolling through his own phone. "No statement, no apology. They're turtling. He's probably in a room with a dozen lawyers trying to figure out how to spin assaulting the city's Humanitarian of the Year on camera." Jasmine turned from the window, her face illuminated by the city lights below. Her composure, which had been a shield at the gala, was now something different. It was a weapon being honed. "They'll try to paint me as the aggressor," she said, her voice devoid of emotion. "They'll say I provoked him. They'll dig for dirt, anything to muddy the waters." "Let them try," Maria spat. "There's no dirt. You're practically a saint." No one is a saint. Maria. Jasmine corrected gently. And in a war of narratives, truth is just the first casualty. Alistair Croft doesn't fight with facts. He fights with influence, with whispers in boardrooms and poison in the press. He will use his family's legacy, his old money network, to try and crush us. David nodded, his legal mind already mapping the battlefield. He's right about one thing. A lawsuit is messy. It's a war of attrition. He can drag it out for years, bury us in discovery, use the process to leak damaging, out-of-context information about Securette. A civil suit is a tool, but it's a blunt one. I'm not interested in a lawsuit, Jasmine stated, setting her glass down on a polished granite counter with a soft click. Suing him for damages is like asking a king for an apology. It acknowledges his power. I am not asking for anything. I am taking... The shift in the room was palpable. This was not a conversation about legal recourse or public relations. This was a war council. What are you thinking, Jay? David asked, leaning forward. Alistair Croft's power comes from two sources, Jasmine began, pacing slowly, her mind visualizing data streams and flowcharts. His wealth, which is concentrated in Croft Enterprises, and his influence, which is rooted in his family's name and his position in the city's social hierarchy. We will dismantle both, systematically, piece by piece. She stopped and looked at her two most trusted allies. Maria, I want you to start a quiet opposition research file, not on Alistair, but on his inner circle, his board members, his key executives, his political allies. Find their weaknesses, their pressure points. We won't use it unless we have to. But I want the ammunition. Maria's eyes lit up with a grim sense of purpose. Consider it done. David, Jasmine continued, turning to her lawyer, I want a full financial workup of Croft Enterprises. I don't want the public SEC filings. I want the real picture. The subsidiary holdings, the offshore accounts, the debt structures. I want to know where every dollar flows. We're going to start with financial pressure. A short sell on one of his smaller, over-leveraged divisions. Something to let him know we're watching. David's fingers were already flying across his phone, sending encrypted messages. I know who to call. But Jay, be careful. You're talking about corporate warfare. He will retaliate. I know, Jasmine said, and when he does, he will confirm to the world exactly who he is. Tonight, he showed his character in a moment of anger. We will force him to show it in a moment of desperation, and it will be his undoing. Her phone buzzed. A secure line. The caller ID showed a single, shielded number. She answered, her tone shifting slightly, gaining a new layer of command. Washington. Chief, came the voice of her deputy police chief. Mark Sandoval. I'm sorry to bother you so late. I saw the news. Are you all right? I'm fine. Mark, she replied, her voice crisp and professional. Her secret role as Atlanta's police chief was a closely guarded one, known only to a handful of city officials and her inner circle. It was a source of immense pride, but also a potential vulnerability. We have uniformed officers outside Croft's residence and his corporate headquarters, Sandoval reported. Just a precaution. The district attorney is chomping at the bit. He wants to file felony assault charges first thing in the morning. Hold him off, Jasmine instructed. I don't want a criminal case to be the opening move. It lets the state control the tempo. This needs to be on my terms. Keep the investigation quiet and thorough. Pull his traffic violations, his tax records, anything that shows a pattern of someone who believes he's above the law. Understood, Chief. She ended the call and looked back at David and Maria. This is the first move. He expects a public outcry, a lawsuit, a criminal charge. He's prepared for that. He is not prepared for a silent, systematic dismantling of his entire world. She walked back to the window, gazing down at the sprawling city. For years, she had worked to build, to create, to uplift. She had built a company that protected people, a foundation that educated children, and a police force that was slowly learning to serve its community with integrity. Now, she would have to use her formidable intellect, her vast resources, and her iron will for a different purpose. She would have to destroy. The humiliation at the gala, the searing pain of the slap, had not broken her. It had awakened something she had kept dormant for years, the cold, righteous fury of the 15-year-old girl in the bank. A promise made was a debt that had to be paid. Alistair Croft had just handed her the invoice. The first strike was surgical. 3 days after the gala, a respected financial analysis firm released a devastating report on the future of commercial real estate in the Southeast, specifically targeting the viability of suburban office parks. The report, dense with data and unassailable logic, predicted a sharp downturn. Within hours, the stock of Apex Properties, a publicly traded subsidiary of Croft Enterprises specializing in that exact market, began to plummet. What no one knew was that the analysis firm was a recent acquisition of a holding company quietly controlled by Jasmine. The report was not false, but its timing was an act of war. Simultaneously, a consortium of anonymous investors initiated a massive short sell of Apex stock, betting on its collapse. The consortium, of course, was David Chen, acting on Jasmine's behalf through a labyrinth of shell corporations. Alistair Croft was in his office, a cavernous space of dark wood, worn leather, and ancestral portraits when the news broke. The room was designed to project an image of old-world power and stability. Today, it felt like a tomb. "It's Washington," he snarled, slamming his fist on the polished mahogany desk. "This is a coordinated attack." His CFO, a nervous man named Gerald, wiped sweat from his brow. "Alistair, the report is solid. Our exposure in that sector is significant. We've been over-leveraged on those properties for years." "I don't care about the fundamentals," Alistair roared. "This is retaliation. She's trying to bleed me." He began to pace, his predatory energy contained by the four walls of the office. "Fine. She wants to play dirty. I wrote the book on dirty." His counterattack was swift and brutal. 2 days later, a prominent online financial journal published a scathing exposé entitled "The Securite Shadow." The article, penned by a journalist known for his take-no-prisoner style, was filled with anonymous quotes from supposed former employees and industry insiders. It painted a picture of Jasmine as a ruthless monopolist who used predatory pricing to crush smaller competitors. It hinted at ethical breaches, suggesting Securite's technology, which was used by law enforcement, could be a tool for mass surveillance. Most damningly, it questioned the Washington Foundation, implying it was less a charity and more a tax shelter and PR machine. The article was a masterpiece of character assassination, weaving half-truths and outright lies into a compelling, toxic narrative. It didn't matter that it was false. It was plausible enough to create doubt. The blow landed exactly as Alistair intended. The story was picked up by mainstream news outlets. Securite stock, which had been on a meteoric rise, dipped for the first time in years. Jasmine's carefully cultivated public image as a benevolent tech titan was tarnished. In the Securite boardroom, the mood was tense. "Our comms team is in overdrive," Maria reported, her voice tight with anger. "We've issued a categorical denial, but the mud is sticking. We're getting calls from city councils in Chicago and LA. They're re-evaluating their contracts. He's using his media connections, David said, his face grim. The journalist who wrote that piece has a long history of doing hatchet jobs for Alistair's friends. This isn't journalism. It's a paid hit. Jasmine listened, her expression unreadable. She had anticipated a financial countermove, not an attack on her integrity, on the very core of her life's work. Alistair wasn't just fighting back. He was trying to burn down everything she had built. "This is a test," Jasmine said, her voice cutting through the tension. "He wants to see if I'll back down. If I'll retreat to defend my reputation. We won't." But Alistair wasn't finished. He leveraged his family's deep connections within Atlanta's political machine. A lucrative city contract for Securet to upgrade Atlanta's emergency response network, a project Jasmine had personally championed, was suddenly put on hold, citing the need for an ethics review in light of the article's allegations. The move was a public slap in the face, a direct challenge to her influence in her own city. The message was clear. You may have new money and tech world fame, but this is my city. You don't belong here, and I can prove it. The pressure was immense. Jasmine's board of directors at Securet was getting nervous. Her philanthropic partners were fielding uncomfortable questions. Even within the police department, whispers started about whether her dual role was a conflict of interest. She was fighting a war on multiple fronts, and, for the first time, her ironclad composure showed the faintest of cracks. Late one night, she sat with David in her silent penthouse. The city lights a cold, indifferent audience. "He's better at this than I thought," she admitted, a rare concession of vulnerability. "He's willing to damage the city itself just to hurt me. Putting the 911 upgrade on hold puts citizens at risk. That's the difference between you and him." "Jay," David said softly, "you build things. He protects a legacy. Destroyers always have an advantage because they don't care about collateral damage." He paused, looking at his friend. "What's the next move?" "We can fight the media war, release our own counter-narrative. But it will be a long, ugly slog." Jasmine stared out the window, her reflection a ghostly image against the glass. The initial, clean strike had failed to neutralize him. He had not only survived it, but had retaliated with devastating effectiveness. Her strategy had to change. This was no longer a simple financial battle. "He's made this personal," she said, her voice hardening. "He didn't just attack my company. He attacked my name, my motivations. He attacked the foundation I built in my mother's memory." She turned to David, her eyes burning with a renewed, colder fire. "So, we make it personal, too." She had wanted a clean war, a battle fought on the spreadsheets and stock tickers. Alistair had dragged it into the mud. So be it. She would learn to fight in the mud. "A simple financial analysis isn't enough," she declared. "I need a team, a dedicated unit. We're not just going to find the cracks in his empire anymore. We're going to find the secrets in his soul. We need to dig deeper, all the way back to the beginning." She picked up her phone and made a call. "Maria, that opposition research you were doing on his inner circle, expand it. I want everything on Alistair Croft, his entire life, every school he attended, every friend he had, every deal his father ever made. I want to know the man behind the monster." The game had changed. The first obstacle had not been overcome. It had been a brutal lesson. Jasmine Washington, the builder, was now fully committed to the art of demolition, and she would start with the foundations of the House of Croft. The war room was a small, soundproofed conference room in a discreet office building Jasmine owned under a shell corporation. It had no windows and only one entrance, secured by a biometric scanner keyed to only 4 individuals. The walls were covered in whiteboards, which were rapidly filling with complex diagrams, timelines, and photographs. This was the nerve center of Jasmine's counteroffensive, and she had assembled a formidable team. Besides David and Maria, she had brought in two of the best specialists money could buy. Elena Vance was a forensic accountant in her late 50s, a legend in the field who had brought down two South American drug cartels and a corrupt European bank. With short, severe gray hair and eyes that seemed to see straight through spreadsheets into the dark hearts of men, she operated with the quiet, relentless precision of a glacier. Marcus Thorne was the investigator, a former MI6 agent who had gone private. He was a ghost, a master of surveillance and information gathering. He was tall, impeccably dressed, and had a knack for getting people to tell him things they shouldn't. Alistair Croft is sloppy, Elena declared after 2 weeks of deep diving. Tapping a flowchart on the whiteboard, her voice was a dry rasp. He's arrogant. He uses a complex web of offshore entities and trusts, but the patterns are predictable. He moves money to conceal, not to grow. It's the behavior of a man protecting inherited wealth, not creating new wealth. He's also a creature of habit, Marcus added, pinning a series of surveillance photos to the board. Breakfast at the same club every Tuesday. A mistress he keeps in a condo in Buckhead. A penchant for high stakes. Private poker games where the other players are always city officials or judges. He paused, pointing to one picture. And he visits this place every month, like clockwork. The photo showed a high-end, private mausoleum in Atlanta's historic Oakland Cemetery. The name chiseled in the granite above the door was Croft. His father's tomb, Jasmine said, studying the image. Robert Croft. He died almost 20 years ago. The official cause of death was a heart attack, but the rumors always said suicide. The timing was interesting. David chimed in, pulling up a file on the room's large monitor. Robert Croft's death occurred less than a month after the collapse of Southern Trust Bank, where he was a senior executive. The bank went under due to a massive embezzlement scheme perpetrated by its CEO. Croft was never charged, but his reputation was destroyed. Jasmine felt a strange flicker of recognition at the name of the bank. A memory from a distant past she couldn't quite place. She pushed it aside. Stay on Alistair for now. Elena, have you found a definitive vulnerability in the corporate structure? I've found a dozen, Elena said with a grim smile. He uses a charitable foundation, the Croft Family Endowment, as a personal slush fund. He makes donations from Croft Enterprises to the foundation for the tax write-off. Then uses the foundation to pay for his personal jet, his vacations, his mistress's condo. It's textbook fraud. If the IRS ever did a real audit, he'd go to prison. But they won't, David countered. He's had the regional IRS director at his poker game. He's insulated. For now, Jasmine said, keep digging. I don't want to just expose him. I want to orchestrate a total collapse. A hostile takeover of Croft Enterprises is the endgame. We need leverage that is absolute and undeniable. As the team worked, Jasmine found her own memories drifting back, not to the slap, but further, to the origins of her own empire. She remembered being a scholarship student at Georgia Tech, an outsider in a world of legacy admissions and effortless privilege. She remembered the sting of being underestimated, the quiet fire it lit inside her. Her obsession, her passion, was finding order in the chaos of data. She saw numbers not as static figures, but as a living, flowing river. She could see the currents, the eddies, the places where things didn't flow right. It was this gift that led to the creation of her first revolutionary algorithm. It was for her senior thesis. The project was to design a program that could audit complex financial systems for anomalies, to detect fraud in real time, to test it. She needed a massive, Messy dataset. Her criminal justice professor, who had connections, gave her access to a recently defunct bank's internal transaction records, all anonymized. Of course, the bank was Southern Trust. The memory hit her with the force of a physical blow. She remembered the thrill of it, sitting in the university's computer lab for days on end, watching her algorithm sift through millions of transactions. And she remembered the moment it founded a single, elegant thread of corruption that, once pulled, unraveled a massive conspiracy. Her program identified the embezzlement scheme with terrifying accuracy, tracing it directly to the CEO. She had submitted her thesis, gotten a perfect score, and laid the cornerstone for what would become Securette. She had never thought about the real-world consequences, the lives that were upended by the data she had analyzed. A cold dread began to creep up her spine. "Marcus," she said, her voice tight. "The bank manager who humiliated my father, the one from the memory I told you about. I need you to identify him. It was a downtown branch of Atlanta Fidelity Bank, about 25 years ago." "Already on it, Chief," Marcus replied, never one to be caught unprepared. "Pulled the employee records last week when you first mentioned it. His name was Gerald Finney. He was fired 2 years after your father's encounter for, ironically, a small-scale loan fraud scheme. Died in 2018. Jasmine felt a strange sense of relief. It was a dead end. A different man. A different bank. The connection she had feared wasn't there. But the seed of doubt had been planted. There was a piece of the puzzle she was missing. A deeper connection that hovered just at the edge of her perception. The breakthrough came a week later. Elena, her face pale with excitement, called an emergency meeting in the war room. "I've broken through the last of the encryption on Robert Croft's old personal servers," she announced, her voice trembling slightly. "Alistair has been paying a fortune to a Swiss firm to keep them maintained and secured. I think I know why." She projected a file onto the main screen. It was a digital copy of a handwritten journal. Robert Croft's journal. Elena scrolled through the entries, which were filled with despair and paranoia, in the weeks leading up to his death. He wrote about the bank's collapse, the shame, the ruin of his family's name. Then, Elena stopped on a single, fateful entry, dated the day before he died. "They are calling it the Washington algorithm," Robert Croft had written, some prodigy at Georgia Tech. A single piece of code that ripped through decades of careful planning. They say it saw the patterns no human could. It was this algorithm that exposed the CEO. That brought everything down. This unseen force, this ghost in the machine, has destroyed me. My son, Alistair, is consumed with a rage I have never seen. He doesn't blame the CEO, who was my friend. He blames the algorithm. He blames the source. He found out her name. A girl from the slums. Jasmine Washington. He says a name like that doesn't belong in the same sentence as Croft. He says he will find a way to make her pay for what she has done to our family. He is talking about revenge. A long game. I fear what this hatred will do to him." The room was utterly silent. The air crackled with the enormity of the revelation. Jasmine stared at the screen, her mind reeling. It wasn't a coincidence. It was a vendetta. 2 decades in the making. Her algorithm, the first great achievement of her intellectual life, the very thing that had birthed Securette and her entire fortune, had also been the instrument of the Croft family's ruin. Alistair's hatred of her wasn't about race or class or professional jealousy. It was about revenge, the condescending remarks, the whine, the slap. They weren't a random act of prejudice. They were the opening salvo in a war he had been planning his entire adult life. She looked at her own reflection in the dark screen. She had thought she was the one hunting him. All this time. He had been hunting her. The board was now set, not for a game of chess, but a blood feud. And she finally understood the stakes. This wasn't about victory. It was about survival. The revelation that Alistair's animosity was a deep-seated, generational vendetta changed everything. The air in the war room grew heavier, the mission more grim. Jasmine now understood she was not dealing with a mere corporate rival, but with an obsessive adversary who viewed her very existence as an unforgivable sin. "He knows," Jasmine said, her voice a low, dangerous hum. "He let me make the first move, the financial attack on Apex, to gauge my strength. The smear campaign wasn't just retaliation, it was a test. He's been waiting for me to engage, to step onto his playing field." "Which means he has a trap prepared," David concluded, his face etched with worry. "He's not just reacting anymore. He's leading you somewhere." Alistair's next move was proof. It was bolder, more personal, and far more dangerous than anything he had done before. He targeted the two pillars of her public identity, her integrity as police chief and her philanthropy. A carefully orchestrated leak, originating from a disgruntled city councilman in Alistair's pocket, found its way to a hungry television journalist. The story broke on the evening news. An anonymous source within the APD claimed that Police Chief Jasmine Washington was using departmental resources and intelligence to benefit her private company, Securette. The report alleged that she had accessed confidential police databases to gain a competitive advantage and had steered city contracts toward her own firm. It was a devastating accusation of corruption and abuse of power. The secret of her dual role, once a quiet asset, had been weaponized against her. The mayor was forced to announce a formal investigation by an independent counsel. Jasmine had to publicly step back from day-to-day police operations, a move that felt like a painful amputation. Her authority was undermined, her reputation as a reformer instantly called into question. Simultaneously, Alistair attacked her foundation. He fed information to the IRS, the very agency he controlled, triggering a full, invasive audit of the Washington Foundation. He alleged that the charity was not fulfilling its mission, that it was a front for political lobbying and personal enrichment. The audit froze the foundation's assets, halting funding for dozens of community programs, the STEM camps, the scholarship funds, the technology training center in Vine City. The very people Jasmine had dedicated her life to helping were now suffering because of his war against her. Jasmine felt the walls closing in. He was isolating her, stripping away her allies and her armor, piece by piece. She was forced onto the defensive, bogged down in legal battles and public relations nightmares. Her resources and attention diverted from the main goal of taking down Croft Enterprises. "This is his masterpiece," Elena Vance observed, her tone holding a grudging respect for the strategy. "He's using your own strengths against you. Your commitment to the city, your charity, he's turned them into liabilities. He's forcing you to fight for your own survival, leaving you no room to attack." The ultimate trap was sprung a week later. A message arrived through a trusted back channel from a high-ranking executive at a major European investment bank. The executive, an old acquaintance of David's, offered a deal that seemed too good to be true. A controlling block of shares in Croft Enterprises was being made available in a private sale by a disgruntled foreign investor. It was enough to launch the hostile takeover. The price was high, but manageable. The deal had to be executed quickly and quietly. "It's the key," David said, his excitement palpable. "This is it, Jay. This is the knockout blow. The investor is legitimate. We've vetted him." But Jasmine was wary. It was too easy, too perfect. Why now? Why come to us? The source says the investor is spooked by Alistair's erratic behavior. David explained, The public assault. The corporate warfare he wants out before Alistair tanks the whole company. The temptation was immense. It was the victory she craved, handed to her on a silver platter. But the lessons from Alistair's escalation had made her cautious. Elena, I want you to run a deep analysis on the financial health of the subsidiary that holds these shares. Jasmine commanded. Marcus, I want everything you can find on this disgruntled investor. His travel, his communications, his known associates. Something feels wrong. For 48 frantic hours, the team worked without sleep. Elena tore apart the subsidiary's financials, while Marcus used his network of international contacts to investigate the seller. The night before the deal was set to close, they found it. The subsidiary is a house of cards, Elena announced, pointing to a screen filled with complex debt instruments. It's loaded with toxic assets from one of Alistair's failed ventures. The shares are practically worthless. Worse, the purchase agreement includes a clause that triggers a transfer of the subsidiary's massive debt to the new owner. If we buy these shares, we won't be taking over Croft Enterprises. We'll be bankrupting Securette. At the same time, Marcus burst into the room. The investor is a shell. He's a frontman for a Cayman Islands fund that's secretly controlled by Alistair Croft. The full picture of the trap was horrifyingly clear. Alistair had created a poison pill. He had dangled the ultimate prize in front of her, knowing she would be tempted. If she had taken the bait, he would have not only saved his company, but destroyed hers in a single. Brilliant move. He would have used her own ambition and resources to engineer her downfall. Jasmine sank into a chair, the close call leaving her breathless. She had nearly lost everything. She had underestimated his cunning, his willingness to risk his own company's stability for a chance to annihilate her. He had almost outmaneuvered her completely. The temporary advantage he had gained was immense. Her reputation was in tatters, her foundation crippled, and her focus shattered. She had survived his trap, but she was bloodied and bruised. He had proven he was her intellectual equal in the art of war. Staring at the whiteboard, at the tangled web of Alistair's schemes, Jasmine felt a cold calm settle over her. The fear was gone, replaced by a crystalline resolve. He had shown her his best move. He had tried to break her spirit, to force her into a fatal error, and he had failed. "He thinks he has me cornered," she said, her voice low and steady. "He thinks I'm on the ropes. He's about to make his final, fatal mistake." "What's that?" David asked. "He's going to get arrogant," Jasmine replied, a faint, dangerous smile touching her lips. "He's going to believe he's already won. And, while he's celebrating, we're going to burn his kingdom to the ground." She stood and walked to the board, picking up a red marker. "The annual shareholder meeting for Croft Enterprises is in 2 weeks. That will be our stage. No more feints. No more quiet pressure. We are going for a public execution." The ballroom at the Four Seasons Hotel was a theater of corporate power, cold, modern, and intimidating. Its floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the manicured gardens, a stark contrast to the tension inside. Hundreds of shareholders, journalists, and analysts filled the tiered seating, their faces illuminated by the glow of laptops and the harsh glare of television lights. On a massive screen behind the stage, the stock ticker for Croft Enterprises, ticker CRF, glowed a steady, confident green. Alistair Croft stood at the podium, a master of his universe. He was impeccably dressed in a dark, tailored suit, his silver hair perfectly coiffed. He radiated confidence and control. The failed trap had emboldened him. He believed Jasmine was a spent force, her credibility shattered, her resources exhausted. And so, as we look to the future, he was concluding, his voice resonating with practiced sincerity, I can assure you that Croft Enterprises is stronger than ever. We have weathered the recent, unfortunate, and baseless attacks on our integrity, and we are poised for unprecedented growth." He was met with a round of polite, solid applause. Then, the agenda moved to new business. The chairman of the board, a stoic man in his 70s, cleared his throat. "We have one item of new business. A hostile takeover bid initiated by the Securite Corporation." A murmur went through the room. All eyes turned to the back, where Jasmine Washington and her team sat. A small, silent island in a sea of Croft loyalists. She was dressed not in a power suit, but in a simple, elegant black dress. She looked not like a corporate raider, but like a woman attending a funeral. "The board has, of course, reviewed and unanimously rejected this frivolous and predatory bid." The chairman continued dismissively. "However, protocol dictates that we allow the initiating party to address the shareholders. Ms. Washington, you have 10 minutes." Jasmine rose and walked to a second podium set up on the floor. She carried no notes, no tablet, only a small, discreet remote in her hand. A hush fell over the room. "Good morning," she began, her voice calm and steady, amplified by the microphone. "I am not here today to talk about Securite's bid in terms of synergy or shareholder value. I am here to talk about the fundamental character of Croft Enterprises. I am here to talk about fraud." Alistair, who had remained on the stage, allowed a condescending smirk to play on his lips. This was the desperate, last-ditch effort he had expected. "Strong words," he interjected, his tone mocking. "I trust you have more than the discredited, libelous accusations that have already been leveled against me." "I do," Jasmine said simply. She clicked the remote. The massive screen behind Alistair, which had been showing the company logo, switched to a complex but clear diagram. Elena Vance's work. "For the past 6 years," Jasmine explained, her voice a clinical scalpel, "Croft Enterprises has been systematically and illegally manipulating its earnings reports. It has done so through its charitable wing, the Croft Family Endowment. Funds are transferred from the parent company as charitable donations, creating massive tax write-offs. Those funds are then funneled through a series of offshore accounts before being loaned back to failing Croft subsidiaries, artificially inflating their value and concealing their losses. It is a closed loop of fraud, designed to deceive shareholders and the public about the true health of this company." Gasps and frantic whispers swept through the audience. Lawyers huddled with their clients. Journalists typed furiously. On the stage, the confident smirk on Alistair's face faltered. "This is an outrageous fabrication," he boomed, trying to regain control. "You have no proof." "On the contrary," Jasmine said, clicking the remote again. The screen filled with bank statements, wire transfers, and damning internal emails, all sourced by Marcus and authenticated by Elena. The evidence was irrefutable. "We have every receipt." The stock ticker on the side of the screen, which had been green, flickered to yellow, then to a stark, blood red, showing a rapid, precipitous drop as traders watching the live feed began to dump the stock. The room was in an uproar. The chairman was banging his gavel, calling for order. But it was useless. Alistair's face was ashen. He stared at the screen, at the undeniable proof of his crimes laid bare for the world to see. But Jasmine wasn't finished. "But this sophisticated financial fraud," she continued, her voice rising slightly, cutting through the chaos, "is not even the worst of it. The most egregious crime committed by this company is hidden within its most obscure subsidiary, Croft Environmental Solutions." She clicked the remote one last time. A new set of documents appeared on the screen: geological surveys, water toxicity reports, and a series of falsified environmental impact statements. For a decade, Croft Environmental Solutions has been illegally dumping industrial waste containing lead, arsenic, and mercury into the groundwater near a chemical plant in rural Georgia. To conceal this, they have submitted fraudulent reports to the EPA, reports signed and certified by the subsidiary CEO. These actions have poisoned the water supply of an entire community, leading to a documented cluster of birth defects and rare cancers. This isn't just financial fraud. This is a crime against humanity. The room was stunned into absolute silence. The financial crimes were shocking, but this was monstrous. It was in that moment that the secondary twist, the final, brutal checkmate, was revealed. Jasmine's gaze shifted from Alistair to a woman sitting in the front row, a woman who looked at the screen with an expression of pure, uncomprehending horror. "The CEO of Croft Environmental Solutions," Jasmine said, her voice softening with something that sounded almost like pity, "is a woman I have come to know and respect through her own charitable work. A woman who, I believe, has been a pawn in her brother's monstrous game. Ms. Amelia Croft." Alistair whipped his head around to stare at his younger sister. Amelia, a well-regarded philanthropist in her own right, looked as though she had been struck. She was the innocent party, the respected community leader Jasmine had once admired, and her signature was on every fraudulent document. She was legally culpable for a crime she almost certainly knew nothing about. This was Jasmine's moral dilemma, played out in real time. She held the power to destroy not just the monster, but his innocent sister as well. The audience held its breath, waiting to see if her quest for revenge would consume everyone in its path. Alistair saw his opening. "You see?" he screamed, his voice cracking, pointing a trembling finger at Jasmine. "She'll stop at nothing. She'll ruin my sister, an innocent woman, to get to me." But Jasmine's next words disarmed him completely. "That is why Securet's takeover bid comes with a binding condition," she announced, her voice ringing with authority and moral clarity. "Upon acquisition, we will immediately turn all evidence of financial fraud over to the SEC and the Department of Justice. However, we will also fund a complete, independent investigation into the environmental disaster to determine true culpability. We will establish a $10 billion trust to clean the contaminated site, provide lifelong medical care for every affected family, and offer restitution to the community that was poisoned. Justice," she declared, her eyes locking with Alistair's, "is not about collateral damage. It is about accountability, and your time to be held accountable, Alistair, is over." It was a masterstroke. She had not only exposed him, but had also offered a path to redemption for the company and justice for his victims, all while protecting the innocent. She had proven herself not a destroyer, but a leader. The chairman of the board, his face pale, stepped to the microphone. "In light of this devastating new information, the board moves to reconsider the takeover bid from Securet. All in favor?" Hands shot up across the room. It was nearly unanimous. On the stage, Alistair Croft's composure finally, completely shattered. The mask of civilized power fell away, revealing the terrified, cornered animal beneath. He stared at the collapsing stock price, at the horrified faces of his board, at the flashing lights of the news cameras that were documenting his utter ruin. He looked at Jasmine, his face a contorted mask of hatred and disbelief. As security guards began to move purposefully toward the stage, he let out a single, guttural roar of pure, impotent fury. The sound was swallowed by the rising cacophony of his collapsing world. The aftermath of the shareholder meeting was a media firestorm. News channels ran the footage on a continuous loop. Jasmine's calm, damning presentation, the cascading red numbers of the Croft Enterprises stock ticker, the moment of horrified realization on Amelia Croft's face, and the final primal scream from a defeated Alistair as federal agents escorted him from the building, his hands cuffed behind his back. The story was irresistible, a modern-day epic of hubris and retribution. The narrative of the two families, intertwined by a 20-year-old vendetta rooted in a college student's algorithm and a father's humiliation, captivated the public imagination. Jasmine Washington was no longer just a brilliant CEO. She was a folk hero, a symbol of righteous justice. In the days that followed, the full extent of the Croft Empire's decay was laid bare. The SEC froze all of the company's assets. The EPA declared the contaminated site in rural Georgia a federal disaster area. Alistair Croft, denied bail, sat in a federal detention center, facing a litany of charges that would likely keep him in prison for the rest of his life. Jasmine, however, took no time to celebrate. The climax of her war had been fought in public, but the most important consequences, she knew, would be handled in private. 2 weeks after the meeting, she sat in the quiet, sunlit library of a neutral law firm. Across a large oak table sat Amelia Croft. Alistair's sister looked tired and fragile, the trauma of the past weeks having taken a visible toll. She had been cleared of any criminal wrongdoing by the preliminary investigation, which had uncovered emails from Alistair explicitly directing her to sign the environmental reports, assuring her they were mere formalities. She was a victim of his manipulation, but the public association with the scandal had shattered her world. "I don't know what to say," Amelia began, her voice barely a whisper. "Thank you for not destroying me along with him." "You were collateral damage in a war you didn't know you were fighting," Jasmine replied, her tone gentle. "That's not justice. I meant what I said at the meeting. Accountability should fall on those who are accountable." Jasmine pushed a thick portfolio across the table. "This is the charter for the new trust we are establishing. The $10 billion from the takeover will be its seed money. It will be dedicated to 3 things: the complete environmental cleanup, lifelong medical care for the victims, and economic redevelopment for the community he poisoned." Amelia opened the portfolio. Her eyes widened as she read the name on the charter: the Croft Washington Community Restoration Trust. "My name is on it for accountability," Jasmine explained. "Your family's name is on it for redemption. A name can be a burden or a legacy. You have the opportunity to redefine what the name Croft means in this city." She paused, letting the weight of the offer settle. "I'm asking you to run it, to be the public face of this healing. No one is better qualified to turn the shame of your family's past into a promise for the future." Tears welled in Amelia's eyes, not of sadness, but of a profound, dawning hope. I would be honored," she stammered. It was an unexpected act of grace, a chance not just for survival, but for purpose. Jasmine wasn't just offering support. She was offering a path to rebuild a legacy from the ruins of another. The news cycle eventually moved on, as it always does. The world turned its attention to other dramas, other heroes, other villains. But for Jasmine, the work was just beginning. The acquisition of Croft Enterprises was a complex, arduous process. She spent months untangling the web of deceit Alistair had woven, selling off toxic assets, restructuring salvageable divisions, and, most importantly, ensuring the funds for the Restoration Trust were secured and properly managed. She worked with a quiet, relentless focus, not with the fire of a warrior, but with the steady hand of a builder. She was no longer fueled by revenge, but by a deep-seated sense of responsibility. She had torn down a corrupt empire, and now She had to build something better and more just in its place. 6 months later, a quiet ceremony was held in the small, rural town of Havenwood, Georgia, the community that had been poisoned for a decade by Croft Environmental Solutions. The air, once thick with the metallic tang of industrial pollution, now smelled of fresh soil and pine. The massive, state-of-the-art water filtration plant, the first project completed by the Croft Washington Community Restoration Trust, hummed softly in the background. Jasmine Washington stood on a small, temporary stage, not as a CEO or a police chief, but simply as a concerned citizen. Beside her stood Amelia Croft, who had thrown herself into the work of the trust with a fierce, redemptive energy. They were not there for a press conference. The media had been politely asked not to attend. They were there to officially open the town's new medical clinic and to present the first round of economic redevelopment grants to local small businesses. There were no soaring speeches. Jasmine spoke briefly, her words simple and direct. Promises were broken here. She told the small crowd of residents, "Today is about keeping new ones." After the ceremony, an elderly woman approached Jasmine, her face deeply lined with a life of hardship. Her grandson had been one of the children born with severe health problems. "We heard what you did," the woman said, her voice thick with emotion. "How you took down that man. For years. We thought no one was listening. Thank you for listening." Jasmine simply nodded, a lump forming in her throat. This was the true resolution. Not the cheers in a boardroom, not the headlines in the paper, but the quiet gratitude in the eyes of a woman whose family finally had a chance at a healthy future. Later that week, back in Atlanta, Jasmine drove to Oakland Cemetery. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the weathered tombstones. She walked through the quiet paths until she reached a simple, modest granite headstone that read, "James Washington, beloved husband and father." She had not visited in years. The memory of his humiliation had always been too painful, a wound that never quite healed. But today felt different. She knelt and placed a single, perfect white orchid at the base of the stone. "I did it, Dad," she whispered to the silent stone. "I kept my promise. It wasn't just about revenge. It was about making sure no one could ever do to anyone else what that man did to you. It was about making things right." A sense of peace, profound and complete, settled over her. The cold, hard knot of anger she had carried in her heart since she was 15 years old finally dissolved. She had not only avenged her father's dignity, she had honored it by building a legacy of healing and justice. She returned to her car as the sun began to set, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple. Maria was waiting in the driver's seat. She handed Jasmine a small, padded envelope that had been delivered by a courier. It had no return address, only a prison processing stamp. Jasmine's breath caught. She opened it carefully. Inside was a small, exquisitely carved wooden box. She lifted the lid. Nestled on a bed of black velvet was a single, polished chess piece, a black queen. Beneath it lay a small, folded piece of paper. She unfolded it. It contained a single, handwritten word. "Checkmate." A small, knowing smile touched Jasmine's lips. It was not an apology. It was not a threat. It was a final, grudging acknowledgement from one grandmaster to another. The game was over, and she had won.